In December 2012, a 24-year-old airman named Ethan Rourke walked off the Peterson Air Force Base in Colorado Springs. He was never seen again. His car remained parked by the perimeter lot, the radio still tuned to a military channel. At first, the disappearance looked like a simple case of desertion, but then his sister Mara received encrypted emails, subject lines in broken code, attachments impossible to open. Weeks later, a photograph arrived. Ethan's unit keychain resting on bare concrete. The family pushed for answers, only to be told the files were sealed under military authority. Over the years, fragments surfaced, erased camera footage, fuel receipts, a muffled voice recording. Each clue suggested something larger, a hidden program running beneath official silence. The story of Ethan's disappearance is not one of closure. It is one of codes, shadows, and a family chasing after classified echoes. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from today. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe. Snow drifted across Colorado Springs in thin waves that December, dusting rooftops and glazing the roads with a faint frost. By late afternoon, the city moved at its usual military pace, shift changes rolling like clockwork through Peterson Air Force Base. Floodlights hummed along the perimeter fence, their glow stretching across the parked cars in pale yellow arcs. Somewhere inside that rhythm, 24-year-old Airman Ethan Rourke stepped off duty and signed out, his last recorded action inside the base. After that moment, no one saw him again. His car was found where it always was, lined up along the far edge of the lot, engine silent. The doors were locked, but the radio inside still whispered static from a military frequency. The driver's seat had been pushed further back than Ethan ever used, as if someone taller had driven last. Small details unsettled the scene. A glove box half open, a folded receipt barely visible, the faint smell of gasoline even though the tank was nearly full. None of it matched the routine of a man known by his unit for discipline, the kind of soldier who lined his boots in perfect rows. News of the disappearance moved slowly at first. It was not his commanding officer who called Mara Rourke, but a younger friend from Ethan's unit who noticed he had not shown up for evening drills. By the time Mara arrived at the base, it was close to midnight. The lot was quiet except for the thrum of sodium lamps. She stood in the cold, staring through the windshield of her brother's car, her breath fogging against the glass. The official word came later. Absence unaccounted for. Nothing more. No urgency in the tone. No acknowledgement that something larger might be unfolding. To Mara, it felt like words stripped of meaning. A bureaucratic pause in place of alarm. Rumors filled the silence. One neighbor insisted she had heard Ethan arguing with his girlfriend 2 nights earlier, a heated exchange that ended in a door slammed hard enough to rattle windows. The story reached Mara by morning. She knew the girl, knew Ethan's patience, and doubted every detail. Yet in a town where gossip and rank traveled fast, whispers of a domestic quarrel became the first explanation offered. Desertion, they said quietly. A choice to walk away. But Mara had seen her brother the weekend before. Ethan had borrowed her old pickup to run errands, dropping it back washed and gassed as he always did. He had plans, schedules, and lists tucked neatly into his pockets. Walking away did not fit him. She kept repeating this to anyone who would listen, though fewer and fewer seemed willing to hear. Back at the family home, the kitchen carried its own small echo of him. On the counter sat a steel keychain, stamped with his unit number, the kind given to recruits during training. Ethan had carried it since his first days in uniform, clipped always to his belt or resting in the pocket of his fatigues. Now it sat on the wood, faintly chilled as if it had been dropped from outside air only hours earlier. Mara picked it up and felt the cold press into her palm, waiting for some warmth to rise through it. None came. The hours after his disappearance blurred into official inquiries and unanswered phone calls. Base security claimed the cameras had suffered a technical error. The gate logs showed Ethan leaving at 6 p.m., but 17 minutes of video went dark in the same window. When Mara asked why, she was told equipment failed, a coincidence not worth scrutiny. For her, it became the first fracture in the record, a void where clarity should have been. At night, she returned to the kitchen, setting the keychain on the table beneath the light. Its silver edges reflected the bulb in thin lines, as if it were holding back some truth no one else would admit. She stared at it until the house fell silent, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound left. Each hour that passed made the object heavier, as though the weight of her brother's absence had transferred into metal. By the next morning, people around the base were already treating Ethan as a man who might never return. The paperwork had been filed under missing, though the phrasing remained careful. Words like unauthorized and desertion hung just beneath the surface, hinted at but never spoken directly. For Mara, those words cut deeper than silence. She knew her brother too well, knew the shape of his habits and the measure of his loyalty. Something else had happened, something that left his car locked, his seat pulled back, his radio murmuring static, and his keychain abandoned on a counter like an unfinished sentence. The first day of his absence closed with snow blowing hard across the streets, wind rattling fences and piling drifts against the base perimeter. Mara stood again at the lot, staring across rows of cars glazed with ice, trying to picture where he had walked when the cameras went dark. There were no footprints to follow, no path to trace. Only silence, a locked vehicle, and the cold glint of steel waiting back home. The keychain remained under the kitchen light, as if it belonged to someone else now, a relic stripped of use but swollen with questions. It looked ordinary, a small tag carried by thousands of servicemen. Yet in its silence, it became the only object tying Mara to her brother. The last touch of his hand before the dark gap opened. The keychain lay frozen beneath the kitchen light. The second morning arrived without answers. Snow had stopped, but the cold held tight to Colorado Springs, and with it the silence around Ethan's disappearance. The Air Force remained brief, repeating the phrase absence unaccounted for as though it could cover every possible outcome. For Mara, it felt less like explanation and more like a wall. She drove back to the base lot to look at the car again. The vehicle had already been moved into a secure hangar, cordoned with yellow rope, a clipboard hanging on the side mirror. She stood outside the cordon, watching the frost creep across the windshield. One investigator brushed past her without a word. Through the glass, she saw the same strange detail, the driver's seat pushed too far back. Ethan was not tall, and he never adjusted it. To Mara, it looked as though someone else had taken the wheel. Later, a security officer mentioned finding footprints near the lot. Boot tracks in frozen dirt, the type issued on base. But the size was wrong. Larger than Ethan's, pressed deep into the soil as though the wearer carried weight or urgency. The officer shrugged, saying prints blurred easily in thaw. To Mara, it was a clue left to decay in plain sight. Rumors kept building. One circle of friends claimed Ethan had been restless, talking about leaving service. Another whispered he had been spotted downtown after dark, drinking with strangers. Every version carried certainty until the details collapsed under questions. Mara had no patience for them. She knew the man she grew up with, the one who kept meticulous notes on his calendar, who timed his morning runs to the second. Desertion did not match him. At home, she laid out his belongings, searching for something overlooked. The keychain still sat beneath the kitchen light, its steel edges catching the glow as the day dimmed. She tried to picture Ethan dropping it carelessly on the counter. The image refused to come. He was too precise, too bound to routine. That night, she switched on the radio in his car, listening to the static pour through the speakers. It carried fragments, thin voices cutting through before vanishing. A channel he had always tuned into, a habit rooted in training. The sound filled the empty lot with a low drone, as though the air itself carried coded language she could not translate. Mara stepped back, the hum settling around her. In the reflection of the windshield, the base lights shimmered like false stars. She thought of the erased 17 minutes on the cameras, the seat pushed back, the boots in the dirt. Details forming no shape yet circling something unseen. When she returned home, the keychain still glimmered faintly on the counter, its number etched in steel. It was beginning to feel less like a belonging and more like a marker left deliberately, the only voice in the silence surrounding her brother. The radio whispered on long after she walked away. Cheyenne Mountain rose south of the city, its slopes dark with pine and streaked with snow that refused to melt in shadow. It was there, among the trails and ravines, that the search shifted once Ethan's absence stretched beyond a second day. Volunteers from the community joined base personnel and local deputies, moving through the undergrowth with flashlights and radios. The air was sharp, filled with the metallic echo of voices bouncing across rock. Mara walked with them, boots slipping on frozen soil, her breath hanging in the beam of her light. Every tree looked like a barrier, every drift a place something could be buried. The official line was that they were covering possible terrain exposure. The truth, Mara felt, was more urgent. They were chasing a man who had vanished under military watch. Late in the afternoon, a small camp was found along a ridge. A torn canvas tarp sagged between branches, empty food cans scattered across the snow. A map lay half buried in mud, damp edges curling. For a moment, excitement surged. Some believed they had stumbled on Ethan's hideout, proof that he had chosen to vanish and set up a refuge. Word traveled fast down the slope, muttered from one volunteer to another. "He ran, he's hiding, he doesn't want to be found." But closer inspection dulled that fire. The food cans bore expiration dates 2 years old. The tarp smelled of mildew. And the map, though creased and marked, had layers of dirt worked into its folds, as though it had lain there through more than one season. Someone called it a ghost camp, a leftover from exercises long past. The red ink circling points on the map had bled out in the damp, forming stains that looked more like blood than planning. Mara knelt by the map, tracing one blurred circle with a gloved finger. It centered not on a trail or a road, but on an empty clearing. No one could explain its significance. When she asked if the item would be logged, the deputy folded it quickly into a bag without comment. Later, when she asked to see the record, the map was gone. Rumor and fact continued to weave around one another. Some swore Ethan had staged the site to throw searchers off. Others argued it was planted to frame him as deserter. For Mara, the details did not settle either way. They sat in the middle, heavy with suggestion but empty of certainty. That evening, she walked back into her kitchen, snow melting from her coat onto the floor. The keychain lay where she had left it, unchanged, yet her eyes lingered on it differently now. It had moved from being just a belonging to feeling almost ceremonial, like a token left to anchor something larger. She wondered if the object was meant to lead her, the way markers guided scouts through woods. Her hand hovered above it, but did not close. Somewhere in the dark, across the mountain they had combed, the silence remained. The map's ink blurred like veins, red seeping across the paper in shapes no one could interpret. The red stain spread slowly in the damp paper folds. The first email arrived 6 days after Ethan was last seen. Mara discovered it at 10:03 p.m., sitting at her kitchen table with the keychain resting under the lamp. Its surface dull with fingerprints she could not bring herself to wipe away. Her laptop chimed, and there it was. An unread message with no sender name, no subject line, only a timestamp that matched the hour she last saw her brother's car. She clicked. The body of the message contained nothing but a string of letters and numbers, stretched into neat blocks like a cipher. At the bottom sat an attachment, a JPEG with a meaningless file name. She hesitated before opening, expecting a corrupted image. The screen filled with grain, then resolved into something more pointed. A photograph of Ethan's keychain placed on cracked concrete. No hand, no body, no shadow. Just the object alone, centered, as if staged under a bare bulb. Her chest tightened. She turned the actual keychain over in her palm, comparing scratches, edges, worn grooves. They were identical, which meant either the photo had been taken before Ethan left it on her counter, or someone else now had one exactly like it. She called the local detective still assigned to liaise with the family, a man who sounded tired even as she explained what she had found. He promised to pass the file along. When she pressed for more, his tone dropped flat. "These things happen. Don't click unknown attachments. Then the line went dead. By the next morning, Mara reached out to someone outside official channels. Colin Dre, a retired intelligence officer her father once knew, lived north of town. He arrived at her door in a worn coat, carrying a leather satchel filled with notebooks. He asked to see the email, scanning quickly, his expression shifting from mild skepticism to sharpened focus. "This isn't random," he said. "These blocks, they follow field formatting. SIGINT code." Mara stared at him, uncomprehending. "Signal intelligence," he explained. "Standard military cipher groups. Whoever sent this knows tradecraft." He leaned closer to the laptop, pulling the metadata from the image. Lines of coordinates flickered. "This point's somewhere, Fort Carson, or near it." The words settled like lead. She had grown up hearing of Carson as training ground, deployment hub. Now it carried a different edge. When she asked what it meant, Dre only shook his head. "It means someone wants you to think Ethan left a message. Whether he did, that's the question." That night, Mara printed the email, laying it on the table beside the keychain. In the photograph, the object rested on concrete scarred with faint cracks. Under her lamp, the real keychain gleamed faintly, its numbers catching the light. 2 anchors, one physical, one digital. Neither brought her brother closer. Word of the message spread quickly through family circles. Her uncle suggested it was Ethan himself, sending proof of life. A cousin whispered it looked like a trap, bait to pull them deeper into something none of them understood. Belief tangled with suspicion until no one could agree what the object meant. The official report she later requested came back thin. A single page, most of it blacked out. No actionable content. Source unverified. She traced the thick redaction lines with her finger, wondering what language lay hidden beneath. At the bottom corner, someone had doodled absent-mindedly, a small chain of loops that almost looked like the outline of a key ring. She didn't know if it was coincidence or warning. Colin called late that week. "If they're using your brother's belongings as signal markers, you need to be careful. Dead drops often use mundane objects. A keychain, a cigarette pack, a folded map. You're already inside their system by receiving that photo." She asked him if Ethan was alive. He gave no answer, only silence, and then, "Objects outlast people. Remember that." The days that followed were filled with more whispers than evidence. Neighbors repeated that they had seen Ethan downtown, stepping into a sedan with tinted windows. Another swore he had been spotted boarding a bus headed for Denver. Each rumor clashed with the fact that his keychain sat firmly in Mara's kitchen, cold and inert. Every night she stared at the printed photo, tracing the cracks in the concrete floor beneath the keychain. She could almost hear the echo of footsteps in that unseen room, the clang of a door sealing shut. The real keychain lay inches away, but felt less real than the blurred image on paper. On the 7th night, she slipped it into her pocket and stepped outside. Snow had hardened into ice patches along the street. Street lamps hummed overhead, and for the first time she felt the weight of the keychain as something more than steel, as though it were a token passed in secret, part of a ritual she did not know how to read. Somewhere, the other keychain waited on concrete, caught forever in a photograph she could not date. Somewhere, someone was sending messages that blurred lines between truth and manipulation. In the silence of her yard, the wind carried a faint whistle across the dark. Mara held the object tightly, listening to its weight rattle against her house keys, a sound sharp and hollow under the night sky. The photograph's keychain shone brighter than the one in her hand. Colin Dre returned 2 days later, his coat dusted with snow, a man who looked as though he had not stopped thinking since their last meeting. He asked to see the laptop again. Mara led him to the kitchen table, where the steel keychain still sat in its usual place, untouched except for the time she lifted it just to feel its cold weight. He leaned in close to the screen as she reopened the encrypted email. His fingers tapped lightly on the wood beside the keyboard. "It's not just code," he muttered. "Look at the structure. 3 sets of groups, mirrored. That's dead drop signaling. Someone's telling us where to look." The coordinates hidden in the metadata pointed to a neighborhood outside Fort Carson. Not a base facility, not an official site. just a stretch of old residential blocks that once housed enlisted families. Half the houses were boarded up now, empty shells in the winter wind. They drove out together, passing through streets that looked deserted, street lamps flickering weakly above cracked sidewalks. Colin parked and told Mara to stay close. They walked until they reached a sagging fence around a garage at the edge of the block. Its door hung crooked, padlock rusted but broken. Inside smelled of dust and oil, as if no one had lived there in years. Against one wall sat a wooden box, weathered, splinters peeling from its corners. Mara reached for it, her breath fogging. Inside lay another keychain, identical to Ethan's, stamped with the same unit number. The metal was dulled, the edges chipped in places different from the one she held at home. For a long time, they just stared. "Duplicate?" she whispered. Colin shook his head slowly. "Either duplicate or planted. They want us confused." She turned both in her hands later that night. Same weight, same markings. The thought pressed into her chest. If one was real, the other was theater. But which one had her brother carried, and which had been left as signal? Rumors stirred again. Word of her trip spread, though she told no one directly. A neighbor asked pointedly if she had found proof that Ethan had joined some underground group. Another suggested the Air Force had given him cover identity, that the duplicate keychain was his new badge. Everyone spoke as if they knew, yet no one could back their words with anything beyond imagination. The dual storylines grew sharper. In family circles, hope swelled. Ethan had staged his disappearance to protect them, leaving behind coded messages to guide Mara toward his trail. Among others, suspicion hardened. He had defected, gone willingly into a darker role. Mara stood in the middle, holding two keychains that carried equal weight but opposite meanings. Colin urged caution. "You're in their theater now. Objects can be weaponized. If one of these was placed here for you, then whoever said it knows you're looking." Later that week, Mara requested records through official channels. A Freedom of Information Act submission came back within days, too quickly, as though processed to end the inquiry. The pages she received were lined with black ink, whole paragraphs swallowed by redaction. At the bottom margin of one page, someone had scrawled a sketch, a chain of loops curling into the rough outline of a key ring. She did not know if it was idle penwork by a clerk or a deliberate signal left for her. The ordinary had shifted. What once was simply her brother's trinket now felt closer to a ritual emblem. It passed between hands, appeared in photographs, turned up in abandoned garages. Each sighting deepened the sense that it was being used, not just owned. It had become a sign in a language she did not know how to read. That night, Mara placed both keychains side by side on the kitchen table. The lamp caught each at a different angle, one gleaming sharper, the other dulled and shadowed. She leaned forward, listening to the silence between them. Outside, the town whispered stories she could not stop. In the silence of her home, the objects whispered something else. Not words, but presence. One of the keychains was real. The other belonged to someone else's story. The duplicate keychain gleamed faintly beside the original. The FBI office in Denver called Mara on a Wednesday morning, their tone brisk and professional. She had mailed them both keychains along with a full description of the emails, hoping for answers. A courier returned one of the items within 48 hours, tagged with a property slip that identified it as non-relevant. The other, they said, was now part of a sealed investigation. When Mara asked for clarification, the agent's voice on the line went flat. "The matter falls under military jurisdiction. Further inquiry is not advised." It sounded less like advice and more like warning. She unwrapped the keychain that had been sent back. It was the dulled one from the garage, placed inside a padded envelope, the slip marked with a black stamp across half the text. The edges of the key ring caught under her nails as she turned it over, noticing for the first time that faint grooves scratched into the metal formed lines almost like letters. Whether they were accidental or intentional, she could not tell. Later that day, her FOA request returned by mail. A stack of papers, every other line thick with redaction ink. The cover sheet apologized for the sensitive nature of the documents, offering no appeal. She spread the pages across her table, staring at rows of black bars that swallowed sentences whole. Where words should have been, silence pressed harder. One page held a detail almost invisible, a faint drawing at the margin, like someone had tested a pen. Curves that looped together, resembling the outline of a key ring. She ran her finger along it, the ink smudging slightly against her skin. It could have been meaningless, but by now, she had learned not to trust coincidence. Colin visited again, his satchel full of notes. He read through the redacted stack with a dry smile. This isn't for you. They've shut the door. But the fact that they sent it back so fast, that tells me they wanted you to know the door exists. Rumors in town continued to divide. Some insisted Ethan had been recruited for covert operations, gone willingly into a new identity. Others muttered that he was already dead, his belongings repurposed by whoever had taken him. Mara felt herself pulled between the lines, trapped between faith and forensic silence. She kept the returned keychain on her nightstand, its edges catching the lamplight at strange hours. More and more it felt less like an accessory and more like a token used in ceremony. Something passed, displayed, concealed. She remembered Colin's warning that mundane objects could serve as signals, dead drop markers, things left in plain sight to speak in code. Each time she picked it up, she wondered who might be watching. The second keychain, the one withheld by investigators, became a ghost in her thoughts. Which one had truly belonged to Ethan? Which one had been placed to bend the story? The FBI's refusal to acknowledge either answer only made the question sharper. She tried returning to ordinary routines, groceries, work, phone calls with family. Yet everywhere she turned, the story followed. A woman in line at the store whispered that Ethan had been spotted across town. A neighbor swore he had seen him boarding a bus. Each account collapsed under detail. Time wrong, height wrong, no trace left behind. But each rumor deepened the divide between what people wanted to believe and what could actually be shown. One evening, she sat at the kitchen table, the lamp burning low. She placed the redacted papers in front of her, layering them like tiles. Across the blacked-out lines, she traced her finger, whispering the words she wished were there. His name, his unit, his last steps. The ink said nothing, but the silence spoke louder than print. The keychain rested on top, its steel ring aligned with the loops doodled on the margin. For the first time, she saw it differently. Not just a belonging, not just a planted clue. It was becoming an emblem, a ritualized object that had passed from her brother's pocket into a chain of signals she could not break. Her phone buzzed with another message, this one unsigned. The body contained only a single sentence, "Stop asking." She deleted it quickly, but the weight lingered. In her dreams that night, the keychain swung in the air like a pendulum, casting shadows across blacked-out pages that stretched endlessly into the dark. When she woke, the object lay on her pillow beside her hand, colder than stone. The black ink swallowed every word she needed most. By the second week, the search had shrunk. Patrol cars no longer circled the neighborhood. Volunteers no longer carried flashlights into the woods. To the military, the case had slipped into silence, classified under jurisdiction. To Mara, the silence meant nothing had been solved. It was at a gas station on the edge of town where the next fragment surfaced. A clerk remembered a night just after Ethan vanished. He swore he had seen a young man in fatigues standing near the pumps. Not alone, but with another figure. Older, heavier, dressed in civilian clothes, but wearing military-issue boots. The two men exchanged words quickly, their faces hidden under hoods. Then they disappeared into the dark without fueling a car. The clerk described it nervously, as if afraid of saying too much. Mara pressed him for detail, but all he remembered was the glint of something metallic in the younger man's hand. He thought it was a lighter, maybe keys. Mara felt her chest tighten. The rumor spread fast. At church gatherings, people whispered that Ethan had been spotted alive. Some claimed he was traveling under guard. Others said he was being escorted out of the country. Each version grew taller, each layered with speculation. None aligned fully with the evidence. When local police checked the station records, they uncovered a receipt. A military fuel card had been swiped at that same pump. the timestamp matching the night in question. But the card belonged to a supply unit, not Ethan's. It should never have been used there. When asked for explanation, the paperwork circled back to the base. The log entry was marked "Valid Transaction." Camera footage might have resolved the mystery. Yet when the reels were pulled, the frame covering that exact 10-minute span was blurred beyond recognition, a static haze, as if frost had formed across the lens. In the haze, only one image appeared briefly, a flicker of light catching metal near the pump. Not a lighter, not a coin, a circular shape dangling in motion, then gone. Mara drove to the gas station herself. She walked across the cracked pavement, stopping at the exact pump. Under her boots, the ground was littered with grit and sand from the winter roads. And there, pressed partly into the dirt, she found a small indentation. A circle the size of a coin, faint but distinct, as though a key ring had been dropped and lifted again. The officers she called shrugged. They said the mark was nothing conclusive, just wear from traffic. But to Mara, it felt deliberate. A silent echo left behind. She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out the dulled keychain returned by the FBI, and lowered it against the circle. The fit was perfect. That night she told Colin. He nodded grimly. Boots out of place, fuel card misused, a blurry frame. They're building a theater of traces, just enough to keep you chasing. He explained how dead drops worked, how one signal could be staged to suggest another. They may never give you the truth. They'll give you fragments. Each fragment leaves you with a choice. Do you follow or do you stop? Mara felt she had no choice at all. Rumors continued to fight against the facts. Some insisted Ethan had been taken by handlers, walking into a program he had no power to resist. Others said he was complicit, playing double agent in a story larger than anyone could see. Between these extremes, the only anchor Mara trusted was the steel ring in her hand. In the weeks after, she noticed the way people looked at her, in grocery aisles, on sidewalks, at the post office, some with pity, some with suspicion, some with quiet distance. The town was learning to treat her not as Ethan's sister, but as the keeper of an unsolved riddle. One evening, she returned to the gas station alone. Snow had melted into shallow pools around the pumps. She stood where the camera had failed, staring at the reflection of sodium lights in the water. The sound of passing traffic faded. For a moment, she thought she heard a clink, metal brushing against metal. She turned, but nothing was there. Only her reflection, blurred by ripples in the puddle. Back home, the keychain rested again on her table. She set the dulled one beside it, two identical shapes under one lamp. Their shadows crossed, forming a chain longer than either should cast. The footage from the gas station ended with blur, frost, and a glint of steel. The next message arrived as sound, not image. Mara opened her inbox one evening to find a single audio file attached to an email with no body text. The sender field was blank, time-stamped just after midnight. She hesitated, then pressed play. A voice filled the room, distorted, flattened by compression. Beneath the static, she recognized the cadence, her brother's. Ethan speaking in a low monotone, reading off a string of numbers that sounded like coordinates. The syllables dragged, as though slowed by interference. At the end, silence stretched long. Then, faintly, came the unmistakable clatter of metal against a hard surface, ringing twice before fading. She sat frozen, headphones pressed to her ears. The voice could have been him, but she couldn't be certain. She replayed it again and again, catching different details each time. The hiss between syllables, the irregular breath, the faint echo that suggested a concrete room. It was as if someone wanted her to believe he was alive while making sure she never knew for sure. Colin listened next, his brow furrowed as the numbers repeated. 89% match to Ethan's vocal signature, he said, quoting a quick analysis he ran on his laptop. But there's interference. Could be deliberate masking. What about the coordinates? Mara asked. He shook his head. They lead to nothing useful. A vacant lot south of the city. Could be misdirection or could be part of the theater. Either way, it's meant to be followed. The rumor mill erupted once news of the audio leaked. Some insisted Ethan had managed to smuggle a message out from captivity. Others whispered the recording was proof he had switched allegiance, reading instructions for someone else. One theory painted him as hostage, another as traitor. Both rested on the same 30 seconds of fractured sound. Mara found herself caught between belief and evidence again. She wanted to hear only her brother's voice, to trust the tone and rhythm she had known since childhood. But the analysis left doubt hanging. A voice could be spliced, manipulated, cloned. The more she replayed it, the less certain she felt. She focused instead on the detail at the end, the metallic clink, sharp and hollow. She played that fragment on loop, isolating it until it became unbearable. It was the sound of steel striking concrete, unmistakable to her now. A keychain, dropped, picked up, dropped again. It wasn't proof of life, but it was proof of presence, as if whoever staged the recording wanted her to fixate on the object rather than the voice. One evening, she drove to the vacant lot the coordinates indicated. Weeds broke through cracked asphalt, and a chain-link fence rattled in the wind. Snow clung to shadows at the edges. She walked slowly, scanning the ground for anything unusual. After an hour, she found nothing but a scattering of rusted bolts and an old soda can. Yet she could not shake the feeling that the place had been chosen carefully. A stage set with emptiness. Back home, she laid the keychains side by side again. They had shifted meaning once more. No longer just objects, not even just symbols. They had become instruments, cues in a performance she did not understand. Each photo, each rumor, each recording returned to them. Steel rings, scratches, the echo of a fall. Whoever had taken Ethan, or whoever he had become, was using the keychains like ritual tokens. Proof enough to keep her looking, never enough to close the search, Colin warned her late that night. The more you follow, the deeper you step into their play. They want you in the audience, maybe even on the stage. Mara did not answer. She looked at the keychains, one gleaming, one dull, and wondered if that stage had already been built around her kitchen table. The audio clip ended with silence, followed by the faint rattle of falling metal. Colin suggested a detour from chasing new messages. Instead, he proposed revisiting the past, not just Ethan's, but the institution's. Together, they drove west toward a low, windowless building that once served as a storage annex for Air Force archives. The sign at the gate had long faded, but inside, shelves still groaned with boxed reports from years of exercises and classified drills. Mara followed him through rows that smelled of dust and oil. He moved with certainty, as though he had walked these aisles before. Finally, he stopped at a stack marked 2010. The cardboard was brittle, tape peeling away in curls. They pulled a box down and spread its contents on a table beneath buzzing fluorescent light. Most of it was routine: logistics sheets, supply orders, maps annotated with grid lines. But at the bottom, Colin pulled a folder whose cover bore a red stamp, half rubbed out. Inside, reports described a series of parallel surveillance trials conducted around Colorado Springs. Phrases like intermittent monitoring and redundant coverage appeared again and again. One page listed names of participating personnel. Ethan's was not among them, but his unit number was, scribbled in pen at the margin. Someone had added it later, in handwriting unlike the typed body of the report. Mara stared, her throat tightening. "What does that mean?" Colin closed the folder. "It means his unit was considered, maybe tested, maybe shadowed. And if so, the signals you've been getting might not be from him at all. They could be echoes from that program, artifacts left behind." The rumor cycle spun faster once fragments of the discovery leaked. Family friends said Ethan had been drawn into an experimental watch list. Others whispered he was training as part of a counterintelligence cell. One version cast him as victim, another as participant. Fact and belief clashed like mirrors, each reflecting but never touching. The forensic cracks grew stranger. The report carried a signature block at the bottom, supposedly signed by a major still active in service. But the pen strokes were jagged, inconsistent. Colin compared it to other examples and shook his head. This is a forgery, either to protect someone or to hide that the signer never existed. What unsettled Mara more was the symbol. Pasted to the inside cover of the folder was a torn label, a small sticker in the shape of a key ring. Its ink had faded to pale gray, but the outline was clear. Not random, not decorative, placed intentionally, as though to mark the file itself as part of the chain. Her stomach tightened. The keychain was no longer just an object passed through hands. It was now printed, labeled, embedded into official records, tied directly to the system that claimed ignorance. She asked Colin if the file could be trusted. He gave the same answer he always did. Trust nothing, note everything. That night, Mara laid the torn label beside the two real keychains on her table. 3 versions of the same symbol, each from a different source. Her brother's pocket, an abandoned garage, and a government folder. The ordinary steel had become a network of echoes, crossing personal, cultural, and institutional lines. She thought of the voice in the recording, the photo on concrete, the blurred camera frames. Each carried the same silent companion. Not Ethan's face, not his hand, not even his uniform. Only the chain. The cliff between truth and rumor widened. Friends begged her to stop digging, warning she was chasing phantoms. Others urged her forward, convinced she was close to exposing a program that wanted to stay buried. Mara felt herself suspended between 2 realities, the one where her brother still breathed, sending fragments in code, and the one where his belongings had been repurposed as props in someone else's performance. In the end, she could not stop. She stared at the faded sticker until her eyes blurred, the outline shimmering like a portal. The fluorescent light above flickered, humming louder, as if the whole room wanted to swallow her questions. The faded keyring sketch stared back from the folder's cover. The discoveries from the archive lingered in Mara's thoughts like an infection that would not clear. She replayed the contradictions, a forged signature, a sticker shaped like a keychain, Ethan's unit number scribbled by hand. Each detail was flimsy on its own, but together they built a scaffolding of unease. Soon after, a new thread appeared, less official but louder. A cousin forwarded her a message from an anonymous account that claimed to be Ethan. The note was short, almost careless. "I had no choice. I'm safe. Stop searching." Attached was an audio clip, the same voice pattern as before, smoother now, less static. For one fleeting moment, Mara's heart jumped, but Colin tested it and shook his head. "It's a construct, synthetic voice. Someone's refining their impersonation." The rumor mill seized on it anyway. Family friends whispered that Ethan had reached out directly, pleading for silence. Online forums speculated he had been absorbed into a covert unit and was trying to protect his family by pushing them away. Every version leaned on the same piece of false evidence, twisting it until it felt almost true. Meanwhile, Colin pressed a different angle. He led Mara to an old payphone on the outskirts of town, a relic rarely used. The booth was scratched with graffiti, its glass panels streaked, but on the metal base of the receiver, someone had etched the crude outline of a keychain, loops linked together in a rush, gouged into steel. Below it, faint numbers, incomplete, worn down by time. "This is signal work," Colin murmured. "A way to mark locations, pass messages, guide someone who knows the code." Mara traced the grooves with her fingertip, her breath fogging against the glass. The carving unsettled her. It was not the careful symbol of ritual, but the frantic scratch of someone trying to be heard. She asked Colin what it meant. He gave the same ambiguous answer. Either he left it, or someone left it for him. Both are dangerous. The ordinary object had now transformed again, from trinket to ritual emblem to institutional marker, and now into street cipher. Every place she turned, the keychain reappeared, not as belonging, but as language. It spoke in scratches, photographs, echoes, and rumors, always without clarity. Back at home, the 2 physical chains glimmered under the lamp. She set the photocopied doodle from the redacted file beside them, then added a rubbing of the payphone etching. 4 versions of the same thing, each tied to a different world, personal, cultural, bureaucratic, and street level. All pointed outward, but none pointed home. The dual narrative deepened. Neighbors believed Ethan had staged it all, orchestrating clues like a magician leaving props. Others muttered he was a ghost already, his belongings scattered as bait. Mara lived in both realities at once, unable to lean fully into either. That night she walked past the payphone again, the cold biting her face. The booth stood silent under the sodium lamp, its scratched etching glinting faintly. A car idled across the street, engine running, headlights dimmed. She felt the weight of both keychains in her pocket, cold circles pressing into her palm. For a moment she thought she saw movement in the car, a silhouette turning away, but when she blinked, the car was gone. The sound of the city fell away, leaving only the hum of the lamp and the hiss of wind through the booth. She placed her hand against the etching one last time, feeling the gouges in the metal like scars. Somewhere behind the noise, a truth waited. Whether it belonged to Ethan or to those who had taken him, Mara could not tell. The etched keyring glimmered under the booth's dim light. Winter deepened, and with it, the silence. Mara found herself sitting at her kitchen table night after night, two keychains side by side, their steel surfaces reflecting lamplight in uneven lines. They had stopped being possessions. They had become signals, messages in a language she still could not fully translate. It was Colin who pressed her to confront the institution directly. "You can't keep circling the edges," he said. "If you want answers, you'll have to look them in the eye." Together, they arranged a meeting with military representatives. It was held in a neutral office downtown, beige walls bare except for a clock ticking faintly above the door. Across the table sat two officers in pressed uniforms. Their faces betrayed nothing. Mara laid out her evidence, the emails, the recordings, the duplicate keychain, the gas station receipt. She asked if her brother was alive. The younger officer shifted uncomfortably, but the elder spoke in measured tones. "Airman Rourke is in a status of active operation. His condition is not for public disclosure. For your protection, you are advised to disengage." The words twisted in her chest. Active operation. Not absent without leave, not missing. Something between presence and absence, suspended in a category that denied closure. When she pressed harder, the elder officer pushed a folder across the table. Inside were photographs, satellite captures of the base perimeter from the night Ethan vanished. One image showed a shadow crossing outside the fence at 6:12 p.m. The form was indistinct, blurred by distance, but it was human. The caption read only, "Unidentified individual, external approach." Mara stared at the shape, its posture hunched, stride uneven. It could have been Ethan, but it could have been anyone. Colin leaned closer, his voice low. "That's not proof, it's a placeholder. They're giving you an outline, nothing more." Yet the implication pressed heavy. If Ethan had left the base with someone else, the missing footage, the blurred gas station tape, the coded emails, all aligned into one possibility. He had been moved deliberately, not lost. Rumors filled the void again. Some said Ethan had been recruited into a black program, operating under a shadow identity. Others insisted he was collateral, swept into an experiment gone wrong. Both stories found fuel in the single blurred photograph. What chilled Mara more was the symbol's return. At the bottom of the report, in small type, an inventory list recorded keyring, metallic, unit stamped as item number 4 in collected evidence. It was marked, "Retained," no further detail. Her hand tightened on the table. One of the chains she thought she still owned might already belong to them. Or perhaps they had yet another copy, one she never knew existed. That night at home, she set the folder beside the chains. The satellite shadow stared up from the page, frozen mid-stride. The keychains rested motionless under the lamp. She imagined the outline of the shadow carrying one, its steel glint lost in grainy pixels. Fact and belief collided once more. Was the shadow proof Ethan lived, moving under a hidden directive? Or was it only a silhouette captured by chance used to string her along? Colin left her with a warning. "They won't confirm or deny. That's their power. You'll keep chasing until you can't tell the difference between rumor and record, and that's when they win." But Mara could not stop. She looked at the chains, at the folder, at the faded etchings. Each version of the symbol told her he was still out there, somewhere beyond the blur. The satellite shadow lingered at the edge of the fence. Years passed. The files never reopened. The base never released new statements, and the town eventually stopped whispering. For most, Ethan Rourke became another name folded into the long silence of military secrecy. But for Mara, the story never ended. The objects on her table remained. 2 keychains, one gleaming, one dull, their edges wearing smoother under the weight of her handling. She kept them in a small wooden box lined with felt, as if preserving relics. Then, one winter morning, a padded envelope appeared in her mailbox. No return address, no postage marks, just her name written in block letters. She carried it inside, her hands trembling before she even tore it open. Inside lay a 3rd keychain. This one she knew instantly. The scratches along its surface matched exactly the one Ethan had carried since training. The same nicks she remembered from the day he borrowed her truck and dropped the keys on her counter. Alongside it was a slip of paper scrawled in a hurried hand. There is only one lock left unopened. Her breath caught. She traced the grooves, her thumb aligning perfectly with each dent. She knew it was his. She also knew what the handwriting meant. Someone else wanted her to believe he was alive. She called Colin. He arrived within an hour, his coat dusted with fresh snow. He examined the keychain under a magnifier. "Fingerprint residue," he murmured. They sent it for analysis. Days later, the results returned. Partial prints matched Ethan's records. It was the first piece of physical evidence tying directly back to him since the night he disappeared. And yet, even with proof, the ambiguity remained. If he had touched the object recently, where was he? If the prints were old, who had been carrying it all these years? The envelope gave no clues. Rumors sparked again, brief and fierce. Some said Ethan had resurfaced, free but silent, sending tokens instead of words. Others argued the chain had been held all along by those who controlled him, passed back only to close the loop. Mara sat at her kitchen table, the 3 chains lined in a row. One dulled from the garage, one retained for years in her house, and now the one that carried her brother's fingerprints. Steel trinkets turned into ritual symbols, institutional markers, forensic artifacts. They had transformed with the story, evolving from ordinary objects into the only witnesses that refused to lie. She pressed them into her palm, the cold biting her skin. The note's words circled in her head. One lock left unopened. She wondered if it meant a physical door, a program yet concealed, or a truth she was not meant to touch. Colin said little now. His eyes carried the weight of a man who had seen stories like this close in silence, never in resolution. "Networks end in shadow," he told her quietly. "Even when you glimpse them, you're only seeing the surface." Mara understood. The return of the keychain was not closure. It was confirmation that Ethan's story lived on somewhere beyond reach. The networks that had touched him, whatever program, whatever handlers, whatever operation, would remain sealed. Still, she placed the chain into the box with the others, locking it shut and setting it on a high shelf. She knew it would become part of her family's archive, handed down as artifact, questioned by whoever came next. The case never found trial, never reached confession. It lived instead as a conspiracy that revealed just enough to suggest a vast machinery beneath, but not enough to expose it. Ethan's absence became permanent. His presence scattered across rumors, recordings, and steel tokens that outlasted his footsteps. Mara sometimes dreamed of him. In those dreams, he walked just ahead, shadow long under the fence lights, a keychain swinging at his side. When she called his name, he turned only halfway, never enough to reveal his face. The sound of metal striking metal echoed before fading into static. In waking hours, the chain stayed silent, cold, weighty, unbroken. The keychain rested motionless, the lock still waiting.